This is going to be a little bit different than what I did the other night. This is the other half of demolishing Islam. And I don't apologize for saying that. I have said it for years that I think we really need to see Islam stopped in our lifetime. Not Muslims, but Islam. Now, let me make a distinction. And for those that whenever these videos get put up on ELF, on their focal site, the Muslims grab them and they pull them down. And then they unpack everything I've said, and then they take me on, and it's great fun. So I know this is all going to be, you Muslims, you're going to take all of this stuff and you're going to pull it down. And this is one way to engage. In some ways, it's a good way also to be peer-reviewed. This is a way of being peer-reviewed. I know that hundreds of Muslims are going to see what I'm going to say today, and they're going to put up videos. I'm going to have to then respond to them. And that's how we learn, and that's how we actually increase. And so it's great fun, this kind of interaction. Let me give you a background as to why and who I am, so you understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, because it may disturb you, especially being European, this kind of talk. I grew up in India, was born in India. My parents were Mish kids, were missionaries. My grandparents were missionaries, so I'm third generation Mish kid from India. My grandparents went to India in 1913, and my family's still there. My sister and her husband live there, and they're not going to leave. My parents' graves are there. My grandfather's grave is there. They never left India. They loved it so much and dedicated their whole life. And to understand why Islam, all of North India is mostly Muslim, and we are now the second largest Muslim country on earth. India is. We have surpassed Pakistan as the second largest. According to the latest statistics, we will soon surpass Indonesia as the largest Muslim country on earth in about another 15 to 20 years with the demographic growth that we have in India. So having grown up in northern India and having had Muslim roommates, I've grown up with Muslims in my school. I did all my first 12 years in India, and then I left India. And I remember when I left, I was so glad to leave India and so glad to leave all the Muslims, because they were very aggressive. Any discussion we had, it was always the Muslims against me. And so I've grown up my whole life debating. That's why I have no fear of Muslims. I love them. They're the most engaging people, but I didn't at that time in 1971. And I was so glad to finally leave and go to a place called America. Now, my accent is American, right? But this I didn't get in America. I got this in India at a missionary school called Woodstock up in the mountains. So when I talk to Indians, I talk like this. He said, "What are you doing? White man talking like this." But I can't help it, you know. We talk like this all the time. This is the way we talk whenever we're in that environment. Moving into the American accent, I have to use that in the West. And it's that background that prepared me for what I'm doing now. I didn't plan to go back to the Muslim world. I married a Mish kid like myself from Kenya. Judy, here's her picture here, my wife. And she grew up in Kenya. I grew up in India. We met in America in undergraduate studies. But after we got married, I was doing postgraduate studies at that time, and I went to a seminar, a one-day seminar, something like what we're doing today, on Islam. And we were told back, this was 1981 now, so we were told back in 1981 that there were 800 million Muslims. Huge number. How do you compute a number like that? Too big. But then we were told that there were only 1,500 missionaries working amongst them. Now that number I could compute. That was a small number, and we were told that 1,500 only made up 2% of all missionaries. So worldwide, we were sending only 2% to the fastest growing religion on earth. And those two numbers were like a slap in the face. And I turned to my wife and I said, "What in the world are we doing wrong? Why is it we're only sending 2% to the one religion that's attacking us at our foundation, the one religion that is growing faster than any other, the one religion that is taking over the world?" Now that back then in 1981, it was still pretty much in the Muslim world. There weren't that many Muslims in the West yet. And so we went to our mission board and we said, "Listen, send us to the Muslim world." And they had no work with Muslims, which was symptomatic of the very problem. So we were seconded. That means we were lent out to SIM, which used to be called Sudan Interior Missions. Now they call it Society of International Ministries. And they sent us to Senegal, West Africa. By this time, I had a master's degree in Islamics from Fuller Seminary under Dr. Dudley Woodbury. So I thought I knew everything I needed to know about Islam, having grown up with it, having had a master's degree in it. And I went to Senegal, and the reason why they sent us to Senegal is because no one else wanted to go there. Because you have to learn 2 languages to go to Senegal. You have to learn French, and then you have to learn Wolof. So we went to work amongst the Wolof people, and I immediately realized that my training did not prepare me for this kind of Islam, because this was very much of a Sufi Islam. It's the confreries, the brotherhoods, the Qadriniya, the Tijaniya, the Murids, especially the Murids, which was an indigenous group of Muslims. And every one of these brotherhoods had pirs or marabouts. Marabouts would be like sheikhs. They would be authorities, but they became mediators between God and man. They took on the role of mediation. Now that I had never really studied. That doesn't exist in Orthodox Islam at all. In fact, it's anathema in Orthodox Islam. And most of these confreries, these Tijaniyas, these Qadraniyas had come out of Iraq and had filtered down through West Africa. And remember, in West Africa, we've had Islam there since the 11th century. So it's a very old form of Islam. While we were there, and we had get dedicated to get 5 years there, and we started a church in Wolof there in our front room, and we were the first Wolof church in Senegal. It is now daughter 2 or 3 other churches. But after 5 years, we got a warning, or not a warning, but a call from our missions office saying there's a real problem in London. Now, I looked on the map, and London did not look like it was in the 1040 window, in that window that you think of the majority of Muslim populations, the 10th and 40th parallel. London was outside of that window, and I couldn't figure out why there were this large group of what they called radical Muslims. And they didn't know how to deal with them, and they didn't know, none of the missionaries had ever come across this kind of Islam. Well, I suddenly perked up and said, hold on a minute, radical Islam, those are my people. They're the ones I love. They're the ones I work with. That's what I'd grown up with. Do you understand what I mean by radical Islam? Well, what's the word radical mean? Give me a definition of radical. A radical number is what?
Root.
Root. There you go. So let's use that definition. Radical Islam would be the root of Islam. To be a radical Islam means to go back to the root. So what would be the root of Islam? There you go. And the model for this book? Okay, so the Book of the Man. The Book of the Man would be the root of Islam. And this was created by a man named Ibn Taymiyyah in the 1300s. And he was the one that actually defined real Islam. He said to be a good Muslim, you must read the Quran and you must follow Muhammad. The Book of the Man, the Book of the Man. 1300. Remember in the 1500s, 200 years later, a man in Germany said much the same thing about Christianity. His name was Martin Luther. Nailed up those 95 theses on the Wittenberg door. Remember that? What did he say? To be a good Christian, we must sola scriptura. We must only come back to Scripture, which is modeled on Jesus Christ. And we call that our Reformation. And I've heard so many people say, when is Islam going to be reformed? And I said, folks, it got reformed before we got reformed. They beat us by 200 years. Ibn Taymiyyah is the foundation for Islam worldwide. All your radical Muslims go back and they quote him. The reason why is because there were 2 men in the 1700s, one named Ibn al-Wahhab. Abdullah al-Wahhab. Al-Wahhab was living in Medina, and he was studying in Medina, 1700. So you're talking about, well, 400 years later. With him was another man named Wahiullah, who had come from Bihar in India, Eastern India, where my grandparents worked. Now, they weren't living in 1700, obviously, but back in 1700, these 2 men were studying Ibn Taymiyyah's material, so they were inculcating this whole paradigm of going back to a book modeled by a man. To be a good Muslim, that's the definition. Al-Wahhab he remained there in Arabia. He then amalgamated himself with a family called the Ibn Saud family. The Ibn Saud family then eradicated all their enemies and took over the entire peninsula. But they were nothing more than a political control. They needed some